There is a chance that what I'm about to say will strike you as either genius or completely dumb. But trust me, it will forever improve the way you write code. Okay, so here it is. All TypeScript functions must have one parameter maximum. So one function, one parameter. So I'll show you the benefits of adopting this pattern and why it's the most logical thing to do in most cases. And after some digging, I found that other developers have reached the same conclusions and they have pushed the concept even further. But every pattern needs to be used in the right context, so I'll also show you how to adapt it to different contexts and when you should simply avoid it. But first, let me tell you how I first thought of this pattern. So I had to make a simple change to a utility function, and I'm sure many of you can relate. And then I spent the next 3 hours manually refactoring every places the function was used. And this could have been avoided with a very simple fix. So let's break down what happened and how I could have avoided 3 hours of soul-crushing refactoring. So let's take a typical TypeScript function with multiple parameters. And now let's imagine that you need to add 2 new optional parameters to the function. So the easiest option is to add them to the end of the function signature. And there are many issues with this approach. So when you call the function with all those parameters, it's not really clear what each value represents, and you have to remember the correct order of the parameters. So this lack of clarity leads to mistakes and makes maintenance a nightmare. So that's the first issue with this approach, because your code is less readable. But then there is the problem of adding a new required parameter. So the new parameter has to be added before the optional parameters, which breaks the order of the parameters, and this means updating every single function call, and that's a colossal waste of time, and as I painfully experienced during my 3 hours of refactoring. Now let's imagine the same function, but this time implemented with the single object parameter approach. So all our parameters are wrapped in a single object, and this might seem like a very small change, but it has some big advantages. So when you call the function this time, it's so much clearer what each value represents. So no more guessing games or scrolling back to check the function definition. So that's the first advantage. The code has a better readability. Then if you need to add new optional parameters, you can add them to the object without breaking existing function calls. And that's the second advantage. The code is more flexible. Furthermore, when you call the function with the new parameters, you don't have to remember the order of the parameters. All you have to do is remember the name of the parameters, and actually you don't even have to remember the name because your IDE will help you with that. Of course, if you need to add a new parameter that is required, you still have to change every call to the function, but at least you don't have to change the order of the parameters. And having named properties makes the change much easier to implement. So next time you implement a new function, consider using one object parameter. It will make your code more readable, flexible, and easier to maintain. You could take this one step further and even use the max params ESLint rule to enforce this pattern across your code base. And I think max params is a great rule to have in your ESLint configuration, but I would definitely not set it to 1. And I think 3 or 4 is a good number because there are times when using multiple parameters is the better choice. So consider short, highly expressive functions like isPositiveNumber or trimText. Wrapping their single parameter in an object will be a bit unnecessary complexity, and simplicity and context are key. Sometimes the order of parameters can convey important information. For example, if we take a start server function with a port number as the first parameter and a server options object as the second parameter, putting port number first highlights its importance. To decide which approach to use, ask yourself, is your function handling one simple thing or multiple related pieces of data? How often will you need to modify it? Are some parameters more important than others? I'm sure many of you can intuitively choose the right approach, but sometimes it's good to make those invisible decisions and make patterns deliberate to keep our code consistent, which makes it easier to maintain. The important thing is to think critically about your code and make informed decisions. And be careful of your own genius ideas and don't follow patterns blindly. For example, if you find yourself refactoring a function to a single object parameter because it's ballooning with too many properties, it might be a sign that your function is doing too much. So you might consider breaking it into smaller, more focused functions. Performance is another consideration. So while using object parameters generally won't affect performance significantly, in performance critical applications, this could introduce some overhead because creating and destructuring objects takes more work for the JavaScript engine than passing individual values. That said, for most applications, the readability, maintainability benefits completely outweigh any minor performances hit, but keep this in mind if you're working on a high performance environment where every millisecond literally counts. Understanding different patterns and when to use them is critical to becoming a better developer, but equally important is gaining a deep understanding of your programming languages and its features. To dive deeper into JavaScript, especially how Node.js handles timers, check out this video and you might be surprised to learn that time isn't always what it seems in Node.js.